All right, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch.
Definitely a thought-provoking one.
Yeah, I mean, the title itself is pretty bold, right? Less about the literal beginning of the universe and more about, well, infinite potential.
Exactly. And Deutsch is a fascinating guy to explore this with, quantum computation, the multiverse. He's really pushing the boundaries of what we know.
So this book, it's not exactly light reading.
Definitely not, but it's incredibly rewarding. He has this core argument about good explanations being the engine of all progress.
Okay, so not just about gathering data, but about really understanding it, finding the why behind the what.
Exactly. Think about it like this. We always hear evidence is the cornerstone of science.
Right. Like, that's how we know what's true.
But Deutsch is saying it's the explanations that really matter, the frameworks that let us connect the dots.
So it's like we can have tons of data points, but without a good explanation, it's just noise.
Precisely. Think of astronomers. They can tell us all about a star's composition, its life cycle, even its eventual death.
And they've never even been close to one, right?
Exactly. That's the power of a good explanation.
So we could observe, I don't know, stars for centuries, but without those explanations, it wouldn't mean much.
We'd just be collecting bright dots in the sky.
Exactly. So Deutsch, he contrasts these good explanations with, what does he call them, bad explanations.
Yeah, bad explanations. They're these theories that can be twisted to fit anything.
Like, they don't really explain anything. They just kind of, I don't know, tell a story.
Perfect analogy. Think of ancient myths, like the one about Persephone explaining the seasons.
Oh, yeah, going underground and coming back.
Right, it's a story, but you could change the characters, the motives, and it wouldn't affect its predictive power.
So a good explanation is testable. It makes predictions, helps us understand the how and why.
And a bad explanation, it's like a moving target, always shifting to fit the data.
So where does the Enlightenment fit into all of this?
Well, Deutsch argues that the Enlightenment was all about this shift, rejecting those static systems of thought.
Breaking free from those intellectual boxes.
Exactly. It was about seeking those robust, testable explanations.
So it wasn't just a period of, I don't know, scientific discovery, but a fundamental shift in how we think.
A shift that's still unfolding, he would argue.
Okay, so we've got good explanations, bad explanations, the Enlightenment as this turning point. Where do we go from here?
Well, Deutsch takes us on a pretty wild ride from there.
Oh, do tell.
He introduces this concept of humans as what he calls universal constructors.
Universal constructors. So we're not just, discovering things, but actually creating them.
Exactly. He's saying we have the potential to create anything that doesn't violate the laws of physics.
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean, like, practically speaking?
He uses this fascinating example of a space station. Imagine a station in deep space, not just surviving, but thriving.
So not just some cramped metal box, but a place where people could actually, I don't know, live a good life.
Exactly, and they'd be doing it through transmutation.
Transmutation. So hold on, are we talking about, like, lead into gold kind of stuff?
It might sound like alchemy, but it's rooted in real science, nuclear physics.
Okay, so stars do it all the time, right? Fusing elements.
Precisely. And Deutsch suggests that with enough knowledge, we could replicate those processes.
So in theory, any resource, anywhere in the universe.
If we understand the underlying principles.
That's incredible. I mean, it really highlights how knowledge is the ultimate resource, right?
Absolutely. And to grasp the full scope of that potential, we need to delve into the world of the multiverse.
Okay, the multiverse, now we're going down the rabbit hole.
Maybe a little, but it's a fascinating rabbit hole.
So multiple universes, alternate realities.
Yeah.
Is this science fiction or science?
It might sound like science fiction, but the concept emerges from quantum mechanics, the idea that every quantum event...
Every, like, atom decaying, reality splitting.
It's one way to visualize it.
Okay, so countless universes, each a different outcome.
Exactly. And within this vastness, we have the concept of fungibility. It's a bit mind-blowing.
Fungibility. Isn't that an economics term?
It is, but here it refers to identical things becoming distinct through their quantum journeys.
Okay, can you give me an example? I'm having trouble picturing that.
Imagine two coins, absolutely identical. You flip them, they land on different sides in different universes.
So they start the same, but their quantum histories make them unique.
Precisely. And that leads us to quantum interference.
More quantum weirdness.
Well, it's definitely counterintuitive, but it's the idea that the possibilities that don't happen can still affect the outcome.
Wait, what? You're telling me things that could have happened influence reality?
As strange as it sounds, that's what quantum interference suggests.
Okay, I need a minute to process this. My brain is doing backflips. So good explanations, Humans as universal constructors, a multiverse, and quantum weirdness. Where do we even go from here?
Well, from here, Deutsch dives into how culture itself evolves, introducing this concept of memes.
Memes. Like
Yeah.
those funny pictures online.
Similar principle, but he's using it to describe any unit of cultural information, scientific theories, religious beliefs.
So like genes, but for culture.
Exactly. They replicate, they evolve through thought and behavior.
So just like you have, beneficial and harmful genes, there are rational and anti-rational memes.
That's the idea, and this leads to a fascinating question. How did this capacity for creating memes, for creativity itself, evolve?
Yeah, where did that spark come from?
Deutsch explores this paradox. He suggests that a period of, strict adherence to social norms
But like being really good at following rules.
might have inadvertently laid the foundation for human creativity.
So by mastering conformity, our ancestors were unknowingly setting the stage for breaking free from those norms.
It's a fascinating idea.
It really challenges our assumptions about how progress happens there.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, Deutsch introduces a concept that might seem surprising given everything we've talked about.
Oh, that
He calls it the principle of optimism.
optimism. After all this talk of the multiverse and quantum mechanics,
It might seem counterintuitive, but Deutsch argues that all evil, all problems,
all problems, really.
are caused by insufficient knowledge.
Okay, I need to hear more about this principle of optimism.
We'll definitely unpack that after a quick break.
Okay, so we left off talking about Deutsch's principle of optimism, and honestly, my mind is still a bit blown from that quantum stuff.
It's definitely a lot to take in, but the optimism piece, it's actually pretty grounding in a way.
Okay, I'm listening because when I think optimism, I think, sunshine and rainbows, ignoring the problems.
Right. And that's not what Deutsch is saying at all.
So what is he saying? Because last I checked, the world has its fair share of problems.
He is, and he's not suggesting we ignore them. His optimism is about how we approach problems.
Okay, so less about denying the bad stuff and more about what? Believing we can fix it.
More like understanding that problems, even the really big ones, are ultimately solvable.
Even things like, I don't know, poverty, climate change, curing diseases.
He would argue, yes, at their core, those are all knowledge problems.
Knowledge problems, meaning we just don't know enough yet to solve them.
Exactly. It's not that solutions are easy or right around the corner, but that they exist somewhere in the vast realm of knowledge.
So it's not naive. It's about believing in the power of human ingenuity.
And more importantly, our capacity to keep learning, keep growing that knowledge base.
It's almost like a direct challenge to the pessimism you see so much these days. That sense that things are just getting worse.
Deutsch definitely pushes back against that.
Which is kind of refreshing, honestly. There's so much doom and gloom. It's nice to hear someone say, hey, we can figure this out.
He even takes on this concept of sustainability, which, is usually seen as a good thing.
Yeah, saving the planet, using less resources.
Right. But he argues that a certain kind of sustainability, the kind focused on simply maintaining things as they are, can actually be harmful.
Harmful. How so?
He sees it as a form of stagnation, intellectually and technologically.
So like being so afraid to mess things up that we don't actually try to improve them.
Exactly. Clinging to the familiar, even when it's not serving us anymore.
So this kind of cautious, conservative approach, it might feel safe, but it's ultimately limiting our potential.
And when you think about the big problems we face, climate change, resource depletion, we need to be bold, not just cautious.
So it's not about ignoring those issues, but about being open to radical new solutions.
Solutions that might require us to rethink our assumptions, disrupt the status quo.
Yeah, I mean, think about something like energy production. We're so focused on making fossil fuels cleaner. Maybe the real breakthrough is something entirely different.
That's the kind of thinking Deutsch is encouraging, and it loops back to the principle of optimism.
Because even if we don't have the answers now, we can find them.
Precisely. It's not blind faith, but a reasoned belief in our ability to solve problems through knowledge.
Okay, so we've got this idea of optimism as a driving force for problem solving. But how does that actually play out in the real world?
Well, one of the key areas Deutsch focuses on is education.
Makes sense. I mean, that's where we first learn how to think critically, how to solve problems.
Exactly. And he's pretty critical of how education often works. Rote memorization, focusing on transmitting facts.
Yeah, I remember spending hours memorizing dates and names. Didn't really teach me how to think for myself.
He argues that real education should be about fostering creativity, critical thinking, encouraging students to question, to challenge.
So less about filling kids' heads with information and more about teaching them how to learn.
Precisely. It's about empowering them to be those universal constructors, the ones who come up with the solutions, who push knowledge forward.
That's a pretty different model than what most of us grew up with.
It is, and it goes beyond the classroom. Deutsch talks about creating a culture that values criticism, where dissenting voices are welcomed, not silenced.
Because those dissenting voices, they're often the ones who challenge the status quo, come up with those new ideas, right?
Exactly, and we need that challenge. We need that constant questioning to avoid getting stuck in outdated ways of thinking.
But that kind of culture, it requires a real shift in mindset, right? We're so conditioned to think being wrong is a bad thing.
He talks about that. Our fear of being wrong, it's one of the biggest obstacles to progress.
Because it makes us afraid to experiment, to take risks.
And it keeps us clinging to those bad explanations, the ones that make us feel comfortable but don't actually explain anything.
So how do we change that? How do we create a culture that's okay with being wrong, that sees mistakes as opportunities to learn?
It starts with recognizing that being wrong is an inevitable part of the learning process. Nobody gets it right all the time.
It's about fostering that intellectual humility, admitting what we don't know.
And being open to changing our minds when presented with better explanations.
So it's not just about science, it's about how we approach everything, right? Politics, art, even our personal lives.
Exactly. The quest for good explanations applies everywhere.
Because ultimately, it's those good explanations that help us understand the world that drive progress.
And that leads us to one of Deutsch's most mind-blowing statements. He says, all fiction that does not violate the laws of physics is fact.
Hold on. Did he really say that? Fiction is fact.
It's a provocative statement, definitely.
But what does it even mean?
He's essentially saying that anything that's physically possible, even if it seems like science fiction right now, could one day become reality.
So our current understanding of what's possible is just a tiny sliver of what might actually be out there.
Exactly. And the only limit is our own knowledge, our own creativity.
So it's not about accepting limits, but about pushing past them, constantly expanding our understanding of what's possible.
And that's where this idea of the beginning of infinity comes in. It's not a point in time. It's an ongoing process of discovery, of pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
So there's always more to learn, always new frontiers to explore.
Exactly. And that's something we'll dive into even deeper after a short break.
Okay, so we were talking about this vast potential, this beginning of infinity, but it feels a bit, I don't know, abstract.
It's definitely a big idea, and Deutsch doesn't shy away from that.
So how do we actually, bring this into the real world? How do we create a society that embraces this kind of thinking?
He talks about that it's not just about understanding these concepts, it's about changing how our society functions.
Because right now, it feels like a lot of our systems, they're kind of designed to keep things the same, right?
He argues that, yeah, a lot of our institutions are more about maintaining the status quo than fostering real progress.
So we need a kind of, I don't know, revolution. Not a violent one, but like a revolution in how we think about knowledge, about progress.
It's a shift in values, for sure. We need to start valuing those good explanations, those people who are pushing the boundary.
And rewarding them, right? Not just, tolerating them, but actively encouraging that kind of thinking.
Exactly, because that's where the breakthroughs come from those who are willing to challenge the norm to be wrong.
And to learn from those mistakes. Right, because that's something we don't do well as a society, admit when we're wrong.
Deutsch talks about that, our fear of being wrong, it's holding us back.
Because it makes us cling to those bad explanations, the ones that comfort us, even if they're not true.
And it stifles creativity. People are afraid to try new things, to experiment, because what if they fail?
So we need to create a culture where it's okay to fail, where mistakes are seen as part of the process.
And that starts with education, teaching kids not just what to think, but how to think.
Give them the tools to be those universal constructors, to come up with their own ideas, their own explanations.
And to be critical, to question everything, even the things we think we know for sure.
Because that's how we get those good explanations, right? Through constant questioning, refining, testing.
It's an ongoing process, and it's not just about science, it's about everything. Art, politics, how we interact with each other.
It's about bringing that same rigor, that same commitment to finding the truth to every aspect of life.
And that's where that optimism comes in. It's not about ignoring the problems. It's about believing that we can solve them.
Through knowledge, through creativity, through that willingness to keep pushing the boundaries.
And that's what Deutsch is ultimately arguing for, a society that embraces that spirit of exploration, that sees the universe as this vast, infinite realm of possibility.
So it's not an ending, it's a beginning of infinite potential.
Exactly. And it's up to us to realize that potential, to keep seeking those good explanations, to keep pushing towards that beginning of infinity.
This has been an incredible deep dive. The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. Definitely a book that makes you think.
It certainly does, and it's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop seeking those good explanations.